Hello, everyone. I had a nagging feeling something wasn't quite right when Emma started dropping subtle hints about her promotion at work. Lately, her conversations had been peppered with mentions of her boss, James. James is such a great leader, she'd remark, or James says I'm one of the most valuable people on the team. At first, I dismissed it. It's natural to be excited about work, right? But then came her request, and it hit me like a brick wall. It was a typical Friday evening. We just finished dinner, and Emma was sipping her wine when she casually brought it up. You know, James has been incredibly supportive of me, she said, her voice laced with what seemed like admiration. He even mentioned he sees potential for me to become a regional director. That's fantastic, I replied, genuinely proud of her. You've worked hard for this. She hesitated, setting her glass down. There's something I want to ask. It's unconventional. I raised an eyebrow. Unconventional how? Her cheeks flushed. Well, she began, her voice faltering slightly. James and I have built a good working relationship. He's been instrumental in helping me grow. And he suggested something unusual. He thinks it could strengthen our bond and possibly fast-track my career. My stomach churned. Emma, what are you talking about? She avoided eye contact, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her glass. Please just listen, she said. James suggested we spend one night together. Nothing emotional, just physical. Before you react, it's not about replacing you or anything. It's purely strategic. I stared at her, my mind reeling. A strategic move? I repeated, my voice rising. You've got to be kidding me. You're asking me to be okay with this? It's not what you think, she said, her voice edged with desperation. It's not about love or betrayal. It's about my career. This could change our lives. I stood up, my chest tightening. So, you're willing to throw away everything we've built for a chance at a promotion? That's unbelievable. Don't be dramatic, she snapped. You've always said you support my ambitions. Her eyes widened in shock. Wait, really? Yeah, I replied coldly, detached. If this is what matters to you, go ahead. She looked relieved, even grateful. Thank you, Otis. You won't regret this. Oh, but she would. She had no idea what I had in store. That weekend, while Emma floated on cloud nine, thinking I had given her my blessing, I got to work. I wasn't the type to yell or create a scene. No, I wanted to handle this in my own way, calm, calculated, and devastating. On Sunday evening, Emma packed an overnight bag. It's just for tonight, she said, trying to sound casual. James booked a hotel to keep things discreet. She hesitated, watching for any sign of emotion, but I didn't give her one. I just turned back to the TV, beer in hand, like it was any other night. Inside, though, I was a storm of rage, humiliation, and determination. The moment she walked out the door, I sprang into action. Earlier that day, I had rented a storage unit in town. By the time I was done, every trace of Emma, her clothes, jewelry, photos, and keepsakes, was packed up and hauled away. The house looked like a bachelor pad by the time I finished. Next, I wrote a few emails. The first was to Emma's family. In a polite but direct message, I explained that she had chosen a different path and our marriage was over. I attached screenshots of her text exchanges with James, which I had forwarded to myself from her phone when she wasn't paying attention. Let them see who she truly was. The second email was to our landlord. I'd already found a smaller apartment downtown and initiated the process to break our lease. Emma didn't need to know just yet, but she'd figure it out soon enough. James, the so-called golden boy, wasn't exactly the paragon of virtue he portrayed. He had a wife and two kids, the framed photo on his desk at work, and the happy family act he put on at the company Christmas party made that abundantly clear. I kept my email to his wife simple and direct. Subject: thought you should know. Dear Mrs. Whitman, I'm reaching out as a courtesy. Tonight, your husband, James, and my wife, Emma, are spending the night together at the Marriott on Fifth Avenue, room 203. I believe you deserve to know what's happening in your marriage. Attached, you'll find screenshots of their conversations and confirmation of the hotel reservation. I hit send, picturing the storm it was bound to unleash. The next morning, when Emma returned, I was sitting calmly at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. She walked in, looking awkward, maybe even a little guilty. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down. "It went fine." "Good," I replied, my tone flat. "I hope it was worth it." Her brow furrowed as she picked up on my tone. "What do you mean?" "Check the closet," I said, taking another sip of coffee. She hesitated, but eventually walked to our bedroom. A moment later, I heard her gasp. "Where's all my stuff?" "Gone," I said, stepping into the room. "Just like you. This house? Not yours anymore. Our marriage? Definitely not yours." Her face went pale. "Otis, you don't mean that." "Oh, I absolutely do," I said, my voice icy. "I packed up everything you own and put it in storage. The address is on the counter along with the key. You'll be staying there until you figure out your next move." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I did this for us," she sobbed, her voice trembling, "to give us a better life." "No, Emma," I said, shaking my head. "You did this for you. And now? You don't have a husband, a home, or a shred of my respect." Before she could muster another excuse, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and I caught a glimpse of the frantic message from James. "Call me now." "Go ahead," I said, motioning to her phone. "I'm sure your boyfriend has plenty to say, especially since I sent his wife everything." Her face crumpled as realization dawned. You didn't." "Oh, I did," I said, my tone calm but cutting. "And you know what else? HR at your company is going to hear about this too. Let's see how far you get without James covering for you." Her tears dried up as the full weight of her actions came crashing down. For the first time in years, I saw Emma without her smug confidence. She was nothing more than a hollow shell of the woman I once loved. She stood there frozen, her face ashen. Then she started pacing, her hands trembling as she scrolled through a flood of messages on her phone. "You've destroyed my life," she hissed, glaring at me with tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, Emma," I said, my voice calm. "You destroyed your life. I just made sure the evidence didn't stay hidden." She flinched as if my words were physical blows. "Do you even realize what this could do to my career?" "Your career?" I asked, incredulous. "That's your priority right now? You weren't thinking about your career or our marriage when you crawled into bed with James. But don't worry, HR will have all the context they need. I forwarded them everything this morning." Her jaw dropped. "You didn't." She stared at me, her anger replaced by sheer panic. "Otis, you can't do this. I'll fix it. I'll tell James it was a mistake. I'll quit the job, whatever you want." I scoffed. "Too little, too late. You made your choice, Emma. Now you get to deal with the fallout." Later that day, while Emma hid in the guest room, frantically trying to call James, I tied up the loose ends. First, I went to the bank and froze our joint account. She wasn't going to touch another penny of my money. Then, I contacted my lawyer to finalize the divorce papers. By the time I got home, Emma was sitting in the kitchen, pale and trembling. "James's wife kicked him out," she muttered, staring blankly at the counter. "She's threatening to take the kids and everything." She glared at me. "You think this is funny?" Emma's tone shifted. She tried softening her voice, desperation lacing her words. "Otis, please. We can fix this. I know I hurt you, but we've been through so much together. Don't throw it all away." Her plea was almost laughable. "We've been through so much." "Emma, don't drag me into the mess you created," I said firmly. "I didn't throw away years of marriage for one reckless night with my boss. That was all you." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "But I still love you." "Too bad," I replied coldly. "I don't love you anymore." The next morning, Emma's phone buzzed nonstop, jolting her awake. Her face went pale as she sifted through the barrage of messages. Family calls and work emails flooded her screen. It didn't take long for her to understand the full scope of the fallout. James had been forced to resign after his wife forwarded the damning evidence to his company's board of directors. "I can't believe this is happening," she muttered, sitting on the couch with her head in her hands. "Believe it," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Actions have consequences, Emma. You thought you could control the fallout, but now you're drowning in it." Her phone rang again. This time, it was her boss. She picked it up hesitantly, her voice trembling. Hello? I couldn't make out the exact words on the other end, but the sharp, no-nonsense tone was unmistakable. Emma, we need you to come into the office immediately. We've received some concerning information, and we need to discuss your future with the company. Her hand shook as she ended the call. She looked at me, wide-eyed. They know, she whispered. How could you do this to me? I couldn't help but laugh, the sound tinged with contempt. You did this to yourself, Emma, and now you're going to find out what it's like to lose everything. Later that day, as I was packing up the last of my belongings, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find James standing there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His face was flushed, and his bloodshot eyes darted around anxiously. Where's Emma? He demanded. Not my problem anymore, I said coolly, stepping aside and letting him in. Emma appeared in the hallway, her eyes widening at the sight of him. James? What are you doing here? Trying to salvage what's left of my life, he snapped. You didn't tell me your husband was a psycho. I didn't know, she protested, her voice rising. I stood back and watched them argue, feeling nothing but satisfaction. They were a perfect match, two selfish, backstabbing cowards tearing each other apart. Eventually, I'd had enough. James, get out of my house, I interrupted. Emma, your storage unit key is on the counter. Take your circus somewhere else. They both stared at me in stunned silence. Emma opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand to cut her off. I'm done. I've already filed for divorce. You can keep your lies, your boyfriend, and whatever scraps of dignity you have left. With that, I turned on my heel, walked out, and slammed the door behind me. For the first time in years, I felt free. It was like shedding a 1,000-pound weight. The air tasted sweeter, my steps felt lighter, and I no longer felt the need to look over my shoulder or try to be the perfect husband for someone who didn't deserve me. Emma and James's pathetic meltdown was now their problem. I had my own future to figure out. But before I could fully move on, there was one more loose end to tie up, the fallout from James's family. If he thought losing his wife and his job was the end of his troubles, he was in for a rude awakening. 2 days later, I got a call from Charlotte Whitman, James's wife. Her voice was calm, too calm, but there was a sharpness beneath the surface. Otis, she began, thank you for the information. It gave me the clarity I needed. I'm glad to hear that, I replied. How are you holding up? Oh, I'm fine, she said, a steely edge to her words. James isn't, though. He's been staying with his brother since I kicked him out, but I think it's time he learns what it feels like to lose everything. I didn't press her for details. Charlotte clearly had a plan, and I wasn't about to get in her way. If there's anything else I can do, I began. There is, she interrupted. You mentioned Emma works in marketing, right? James's company is in full damage control mode, and they're looking for someone to blame. I'll make sure her name comes up. I didn't bother hiding my grin. Thanks, Charlotte. I owe you one. Don't mention it, she said icily. Let's just say we're both making sure they can't escape the consequences of their choices. Emma was floundering. I'd officially moved into my new apartment downtown, and the house stood empty, a shell of what it once was. Through mutual friends and her increasingly desperate texts, I heard she'd been suspended from her job. James's scandal had dragged her into the spotlight, and HR wasn't about to take any risks. She left me one teary voicemail that I didn't bother finishing before deleting. Otis, please, I'm begging you. Just talk to me. I don't have anyone else. I'll do anything. Just let me fix this. But Emma wasn't the only one knocking at my door. One evening, James showed up at my apartment. He looked terrible, his expensive suit wrinkled, his tie hanging loose like he barely had the energy to dress himself. I didn't even invite him in. What do you want, James? I asked, standing in the doorway. We need to talk, he rasped. You've ruined everything, man. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. No, James. You ruined everything. I just made sure everyone else knew. He rubbed his temples, his frustration boiling over. You don't understand. Charlotte's frozen our accounts. My career is over. Emma, she's falling apart. We made a mistake, okay? But it wasn't supposed to end like this. I let out a bitter laugh. You made a mistake? That's rich, coming from the guy who slept with my wife. What did you think, James? That you'd just get away with it? His face flushed, and his voice rose. She came to me. She wanted this. Emma said you didn't understand her ambitions, that you were holding her back. That stung, but I refused to let it show. And you thought you were the solution? I shot back. Get out of here, James. Go clean up your own mess. Defeated, he turned and shuffled away. Watching him slink off was oddly satisfying. A man who thought he had it all brought low by his own arrogance. A week later, Emma lost her job officially. I heard through a coworker of hers who still kept in touch. The official reason was unprofessional conduct, but everyone knew the real story. She texted me again, asking for a place to stay, but I ignored her. She made her bed. Now she could lie in it. As for James, Charlotte was true to her word. She dragged him through divorce court with a vengeance. She'd hired one of the toughest lawyers in the state and was gunning for full custody, the house, and a significant chunk of his finances. From what I heard, James was holed up in a dingy rental, drowning in legal fees. As the dust settled, I finally started focusing on myself. For years, I'd put Emma's needs above my own, sacrificing my happiness for someone who didn't appreciate it. Now, I was free. I took up hiking, reconnected with old friends, and even started dating again. Nothing serious, but it felt good to rediscover who I was outside of her shadow. One evening, I got a text from Charlotte. Drinks on me. Let's toast to freedom. I smiled, typing back. Name the time and place. Emma and James had been the architects of their own destruction, and now they were left to deal with the fallout. Meanwhile, I was building a new life, free of lies, betrayal, and toxic people. Charlotte chose a cozy wine bar downtown, the kind of place where the ambience was lively enough to drown out the weight of heavy conversations. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table, a glass of red wine in hand. Her sharp green eyes met mine, and she smiled, a mixture of relief and satisfaction. To freedom, she said, raising her glass as I sat down. To freedom, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. We talked for hours, exchanging the absurd, infuriating details of what our respective spouses had put us through. For Charlotte, it wasn't just James's betrayal, but years of subtle manipulation and his arrogant belief that he was untouchable. For me, it was realizing I'd spent years with someone who treated our marriage as a stepping stone rather than a partnership. You know, Charlotte said, swirling her wine thoughtfully, I'm not even angry anymore. Their actions had set them on a path they never anticipated, and now they were left grappling with the fallout. Meanwhile, I was finally free of the weight they'd placed on my shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. I feel liberated, Charlotte had said that night at the wine bar, and she was right. It was as if breaking free from the tangled mess of betrayal had given us both room to breathe. I nodded, raising my glass. It's like they thought they could outsmart us, but in the end, they only outplayed themselves. Charlotte laughed, a warm, genuine sound. I guess some lessons come with a steep price tag, and a steep price it was. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard about the aftermath. James was buried in debt, thanks to Charlotte's divorce settlement, which left him without the house and full custody of the kids. His once lavish lifestyle was reduced to scraping by to cover legal fees and basic expenses. Emma wasn't faring much better. Her career was in shambles, her reputation irreparably damaged by the scandal. In an industry that thrives on connections and trust, no one was willing to take the risk of hiring her. She was couch surfing with friends, selling off her designer handbags to pay rent for a small studio apartment. Occasionally, she'd send me a message, a plea for help, an apology, or a desperate attempt to reignite the love we once shared. I ignored them all. One text, though, stood out. I made a mistake. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I regret everything. I hope you find happiness, Otis. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something, pity, maybe, but it faded just as quickly. Her regret didn't undo the damage she'd caused, and by then, I'd already moved on. Life after Emma was better than I could have imagined. I threw myself into hobbies I'd neglected for years. Hiking became a weekly ritual, a way to reconnect with nature and clear my mind. I took cooking classes, joined a local trivia league, and started writing, a therapeutic outlet to process everything I'd been through. Charlotte and I continued to keep in touch. What started as a bond over shared betrayal evolved into a genuine friendship. She was sharp, funny, and fiercely independent, a refreshing contrast to the toxicity we had both endured. Over time, that friendship deepened into something more. We weren't in a rush, but for the first time in years, I felt I could truly trust someone. One evening, as we sat on her patio watching the sun set in a blaze of gold and amber, she turned to me with a sly grin. "Do you think they ever saw this coming?" "Not in a million years," I replied, smiling back. "James and Emma thought they were so clever. Now they're the ones left picking up the pieces." Charlotte raised her glass, the fading sunlight casting a warm glow on her face. "Here's to new beginnings." "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a deep sense of closure. Emma and James had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. As for me, I was finally free. Free to build a life that wasn't weighed down by lies and betrayal. Sitting there with Charlotte, I knew that the future was mine to shape, and for the first time, it felt bright. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel. Bye.